Hey there, interwebs. You've probably heard of the Araignées, better known as the Furies. I mentioned them in the Gorgon video. You've also almost certainly heard of the Fates and the Muses, but I can virtually guarantee you've never heard of the Sympathies. These were the daughters of Zeus Amostigmatikinit Panhellenios, and a willow tree he stuck his dick in. It wasn't a tree at the time, though I wouldn't put it past him. You see, Zeus was putting it about as he was wont to do, and Hera, as usual, wasn't keen and decided to take it out on the mistress instead of her unfaithful husband. In this case, she decided to turn the poor woman into a willow tree before she could give birth. Because permanently pregnant and also a tree aren't things anyone would want to be, Zeus took pity on his former lover, what with it being his fault in the first place, and struck her with a bolt of lightning, granting her the mercy of what I would hope was a quick death by electrocution. When struck, her core split open, and out popped the Sympathies in a grotesque parody of childbirth that only Greek mythology can provide. There were between 3 and 12 of these literal and metaphorical relatives of the Furies, depending on which version of the story you believe, and under charge by Hermes, messenger of the gods, they carried thoughts and prayers to grieving people who had lost loved ones. Except they didn't. Zeus never banged a tree, and the Sympathies never existed, not even in myth. They're a fiction I made up for this video. You see, what I really want to discuss today is the question, what counts as canon when we're talking about mythology? In the Villains of Greek Mythology video, I cited Ovid's Metamorphoses quite a lot for backstories on the monsters we all know and presumably love, but Ovid was a Roman writer born in 43 BC, centuries after many of the Greek myths he retold were already well established. Is my nonsense about the Sympathies any less official than all the extra details he made up or just flat out changed from the source material? To start out with, Greek mythology never had canon, which is why all the popular stories are such flusterclucks of contradictory information. It was mostly word of mouth, and storytellers were free to add and alter details wherever they saw fit. As time went on, things got adapted in and stories got recontextualized, and we just have to live with that. Since there's no true story, only older versions, it's hard to say Ovid's tellings are any less legitimate, but let's look at a specific example. You know the 10, make that 12, labors of Heracles. How could you not? It's one of the most famous stories in all of mythology and gives us the everyday expression a Herculean task, and yet canon on even this is fuzzy. For example, that lion skin you always see him wearing is often said to be that of the Nemean lion, but some experts still argue that it belonged to the Thespian lion of Kithaeron, which he slew before he even got started on the heroic business. And while we're on the subject, how did he slay the Nemean lion exactly? Some sources say he stunned it with a blow to the head from his club and then strangled it, but others say he killed it by shooting it with an arrow in its unarmored mouth. Even more interesting is that there is no set order that the labors occurred in. We know that 6 of them were performed in the Peloponnese, and the other half-dozen were farther afield. This, combined with the fact that no single account of all 12 labors survives, has led some scholars to believe some of these tasks may have been performed by a different, now unknown hero, and reattributed to Heracles in later unified retellings. Interesting, am I right? Now we can look at Ovid. His 2 most notorious changes for metamorphoses relate to Medusa and Arachne. I discussed both of them in the Greek Villains video, and went into more depth on Medusa in the Gorgons video. I'll briefly go over the major differences one more time here. Originally, Arachne wasn't a god-tier weaver, only a god-tier braggart, and Athena smacked her down in competition and turned her into a spider for her hubris. In Metamorphoses, she was still a braggart, but she was even better than Athena on the loom, and this angered the goddess so much that she destroyed Arachne's work and turned her into a spider just to spite her. In the original tellings, Medusa was always a hideous monster. In Ovid's retellings, she was once a beautiful priestess of Athena, but after Poseidon forced himself on her in the goddess's temple, Athena turned her into a walking petrifier. To this day, people still debate if Arachne really deserved to be spiderified and whether Medusa's transformation was a divine blessing because you can't rape what you can't see, or a wrathful curse adding insult to injury. Some argue that the whole debate is pointless because Ovid made the whole thing up. I'm going to put my atheist hat on now and point out that none of these events ever actually happened because it's all fiction. If it's made up anyhow, how much does it really matter who made it up? Shouldn't we judge the different versions by their own merits, and isn't a mark of good storytelling if it provokes thought and debate? Look back at the original. Medusa was an ugly monster from birth to death, end of story. What kind of discussion is that going to spark? What Ovid really did was make Arachne and Medusa way more interesting as tragic characters, but at the cost of turning Athena into the monster. A different kind of monster, yes, but a monster nonetheless. Frankly, I like his versions better, because he makes the monsters interesting characters, and I'm all about character. I also believe that if the gods did exist, they'd be pretty unconcerned with the welfare of puny mortals like us and be much more like Q, okay? It's funny. Ovid presumably named his work Metamorphoses because of all the characters who get transformed into things, but really he was transforming the myths themselves for centuries to come. There are lots of things besides Metamorphoses that are accepted as official in modern times despite not starting out that way. Consider the hippogriff. These days it's just accepted as a standard fantasy animal, and it's even made a major appearance in the series that mustn't be named, but as I mentioned in Things with Wings, they're sub-mythical animals. It wasn't invented until the 1st century BC by Virgil as a metaphor for an impossible task, because to get one you'd have to breed a horse with a griffin, and those two creatures famously hate each other. It's the same story for the peregrine, a combination of bird and deer, which is standard fantasy today, but was only invented by Jorge Luis Borges in the 1950s for his book of imaginary beings. An even newer invention is the deity Mesperaion, goddess of torture and punishment, who was allegedly Greek but was actually invented an entire decade ago in 2009 for a fanfic and swiftly adopted as canon by Tumblr. You're free to hang your head and decry this as ludicrous, but this might actually be the same story for Glycon. He was a snake god with a large and influential cult in the 2nd century, but the primary reference we have to him comes from Lucian, who claimed that he started out as a hand puppet as part of a hoax cooked up by the oracle Alexander the Paphlagorian, a sentiment shared by Alan Moore. In summary, it's impossible to say what's canon in ancient mythology, because there is no canon and never was. The closest thing to it is the oldest available version and common elements, but it doesn't really matter. Stories have been told and retold since time immemorial, and I'm sure what we consider traditional today started out as some ancient Greek's fan fiction. We should know where our stories come from, but we should judge them by whether or not they're any good. If the authenticity of a work means more to you than its quality, I'm afraid you may have missed the point. This has been kind of a reply to Overly Sarcastic Productions' EO and Arachne videos. If you're somehow watching this but have never heard of them, go check out their channel. If you liked what you saw, show this to someone else. Original artwork has been provided by the lovely and talented Quinn Platzer. If you want more of my writing and want to show your support, you can follow me on Twitter and check out my books on Amazon. As always, the links are in the description. Thanks for watching, and have a nice day. What annoys me about Mesperaion, besides her name, is that it's not like she was filling a previously empty niche. The Greeks already had a goddess of comeuppance in the form of Nemesis, and pain and torture clearly go to Eris's daughters, Lupe, Aeneas, and Achos. They were the Algaea, which literally means pains. Or just use Persephone's daughter Melinoe, bringer of nightmares and madness. It's not like Google didn't exist in 2009. You can look it up just like I did.